Hi, Chris. Thanks for joining us today. I'd like to ask you about how you see what has happened recently. We're having this conversation remotely because of the pandemic, because of the things that all of these CIOs have done to make their teams work remotely and their colleagues work remotely. But that's had a big impact, and we've seen a big change in the way that people have worked. And I wonder, from your experience of talking to CIOs, how you see the next 18 months or so working out.
Thanks, Chris. And it's great to be here. And I really appreciate the question because I do think we have figured out how we're all going to be productive working from home. And as I talk to CIOs around the world, there's really three big themes that are popping up. And the first one is around how do I protect and grow my top line? And as traditional supply chains have been disrupted, it's all about delivering that much better customer experience, a customer experience which creates loyalty, which creates upsell, creates and maintains that connection. And it's about the operations that support that customer. So protecting and growing the top line is the first big theme. The second one actually gets a number of different names: pursuing productivity, scaling operations, optimizing the financial model, or good old-fashioned cost takeout. And regardless of the umbrella heading that one would put on it, the destination is always the same: moving work and manual work, especially, to digital platforms and digital platforms at scale across the enterprise. So we're seeing a big, push on the use of virtual labor, on automation, and full automation. We've all been at the automation game for decades, but getting to that last mile of automation to really eliminate the work and move it to digital platforms. And just as a data point, in our cloud, we've seen a 360% increase in chatbot conversations in the last 90 days. And whether it's organizations like state agencies here in the States, or it's massive corporations, insurance companies, increasingly using virtual labor to help scale their operations. So the second one is all around pursuing productivity and hyper-automation, if you will. And the third one is around prioritizing risk. And while we've all looked at technology resiliency for a long time in each of our organizations, it's also now about the human resiliency. How many layers deep does your human resiliency go in your enterprise? And if 10% of your workforce gets sick with the pandemic, how do you stand? And getting an integrated view of risk across the enterprise, a place where you're continuously monitoring versus finding out for some instance that you have some risk that you weren't managing. So those are the three big themes, massive implications in terms of programs that everyone is driving. And underwriting all of it, I just say, and I'll close out here, Chris, and hand it back to you, is speed. I have talked to so many CIOs who have said initiatives that would have taken 14 months to get done are getting done in 6 weeks. Decisions which would have taken 4 months are happening in hours. And the speed of everyone leading into digital transformation, innovation, transformation in general has only increased. And I don't think there's any going back.
That's really interesting. I think what you're saying, we see reflected in a lot of the organizations we've talked to and worked with. One of the issues with that, though, is that people's experience of how they work has changed a lot, right? The way that they are onboarded, the way that they are trained, the way that they start new programs and work with different teams. This is a really different way of working now, isn't it? So how do organizations deal with that? How can you see them making sure that their teams and their people can work effectively in the future and keep up with the technology you've just been talking about?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And there's a lot to unpack there from my standpoint, but I'll try and be concise. And I'll use the term employee experience. Employee experience has become more and more important for companies. And let's talk about the why. From my perspective, I think the consumer tech companies have shown us the power of experience. And experience isn't just about pretty screens. The right experience can actually enable and accelerate the behavioral and economic outcomes that we're looking for as enterprises. And whether those outcomes are employee engagement, productivity, speed, we want people to do a certain way, the experience will make or break that in terms of getting to that business outcome. The other aspect of it, I think employee experience is going to become a competitive differentiator. there are lots of articles written about the shortage of tech talent. And we all know with every company becoming a software company, tech talent, the demand for it is only going to rise. And the companies that have invested in employee experience, where it's easy to get things done, where employees aren't forced to navigate what I call the org chart of the company to get the simplest thing done, versus a company which hasn't invested in it and it feels old and clunky, guess who's going to attract the higher level talent, right? It's a pretty simple answer. So I think increasingly it's going to become a competitive differentiator in terms of talent acquisition and talent retention. But you also hit on another thing, which is this is a lot, and it's a lot of change that we're throwing at a lot of our workforces. And I think part of our jobs as CIOs is to make sure we are enabling the workforce of the future. And I do think that's part of our responsibility as we enable all this. And I talked about work moving to virtual labor. That doesn't mean all of our workforces go away. What it means is we have to invest in those workforces to make sure they understand how do they coexist along with these big platforms to get work done, to be a force multiplier for their own organizations.
I could pick up on a couple of things there, because what you just said about how you empower people, how you get them to work more effectively, along with that removing the need, as you say, to navigate that org chart of the organization. Sometimes that's a bit, you have to give them agency, really so that the IT team and the CIO isn't the one version of everything that has to be done, because we're in a very flexible situation. The companies are going to go through more changes. We're going to have potential recession around the world, and organizations are going to have to deal with that. So can we help people to solve their own problems rather than relying on going back to the one version of the truth? Is that part of the answer?
Yeah, I mean, self-service, enabling employees to get their work done easier without, phone calls and emails. And again, taking a look at a consumer. How do we get things done in our consumer life? You just search for it. So, and that's what I meant by not having the employees navigate the org chart of the company. Think about unified portals where there's not department names at the top, right? HR, IT, facilities, payroll, etc. It's just a search form. Imagine that. And I was actually had the pleasure of talking with a number of shared services leaders in EMEA last week. And the concept is something that everyone is leaning into, because while employee experience can feel a bit, it's experience and squishy and what's the real ROI, I think experience and productivity are two sides of the same coin. And if you think about those departments that are serving up that employee experience, and it is IT, HR, facilities, payroll, finance, etc., we have seen in our customer install base on the front end for employee experience driving 50, 60% self-service and really transforming the employee experience. But the other side of that coin is for those departments that are serving up that employee experience, 40, 45% productivity increases, which is margin expansion, which is the ability to do more with that labor, which is all part of the strategic objectives at every single company, whether they call it a shared service or not.
Oh, thank you. Well, Chris, that's been really fantastic, really interesting. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate the invite.